I don't hike anymore. I used to. I loved it. The fresh air, the quiet, the feeling of being so far removed from everything. It was my escape. But after what happened in Ocala National Forest, I haven't set foot on a trail since. It was supposed to be a 3-day solo trip. I had planned it for weeks, mapping out my route, packing my gear, checking the weather. I wasn't new to this, I had done dozens of solo hikes before. This was nothing different. At least, that's what I told myself. The first day went fine. The forest was beautiful, towering pines, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the occasional chatter of birds. I hiked about 10 miles and before setting up camp near a small creek. Cooked dinner, listened to the sounds of nature, fell asleep under the stars. Then, in the middle of the night, something woke me up. A knock. Not on my tent, on a tree. It was distant, rhythmic. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. I lay there, holding my breath. It could have been anything, an animal, branches shifting in the wind. But something about it felt wrong. Then, from the opposite direction, the knocks came again. Closer. I sat up, my heart hammering. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, shining the beam into the darkness. The trees stood still. The forest was dead silent. No wind. No insects. Just silence. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination running wild. I forced myself to lie back down, but I barely slept. By morning, I convinced myself I had overreacted. I packed up my gear and continued hiking. That's when I found the first set of footprints. They weren't mine. They were barefoot. Large. Too large. The toes were long, almost claw-like, pressing deep into the earth. They circled my campsite. I swallowed hard. Maybe a hoax. Maybe some hunter playing a prank. But something about them made my skin crawl. They weren't just near my camp. They were around it. Watching. Waiting. I should have turned back. But I didn't. I kept hiking, trying to shake the unease. By late afternoon, I reached my next campsite, another clearing near the base of a hill. The uneasiness from the morning hadn't left me, so I set up my tent earlier than usual. As night fell, the forest changed again. The knocking started at sundown. Distant. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. Then, closer. I sat by my fire, gripping my knife, my flashlight shaking in my hands. Then, the laughter started. Soft. Distant. A child's laughter. My blood ran cold. It came from the trees. I stood up fast, scanning the forest, my breath coming in short gasps. The laughter grew louder. Then, silence. The fire crackled. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, behind me. Hello. I spun around. Nothing. Just trees. Just darkness. Then, from behind me, again. Hello. A whisper. Too close. I grabbed my gear and ran. I didn't even pack my tent, I just grabbed my bag and flashlight and ran into the dark. The laughter followed me. The knocking followed me. Something was chasing me. I ran until I couldn't breathe. Until my legs burned. Until I saw the glow of a ranger station up ahead. I stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me. The ranger behind the desk looked up, startled. "You okay?" I was shaking, gasping for air. Something was out there. His expression darkened. He walked to the window, peering outside. Then, without looking back at me, he said, "You're lucky." I swallowed hard. Lucky. He nodded. Most people who hear the knocking, they don't make it out. I didn't ask any more questions. I never went back. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I swear I still hear it. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I used to. I loved it, actually. The peace, the quiet, the feeling of being completely detached from the world. I wasn't some amateur either. I knew how to read a map, how to navigate trails, how to handle myself in the wild. But after what happened in Ocala National Forest, I won't ever go out there alone again. It was supposed to be a short overnight trip. Just me, my backpack, and a few miles of untouched wilderness. I picked a remote trail, one that was rarely used, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person left on Earth. I planned to hike a few miles in, set up camp, and head back in the morning. Simple. It started out that way, too. The sun was high, the trail dry beneath my boots. The trees stretched endlessly above me, their thick canopies casting dappled shadows across the ground. The sound of birds and insects filled the air, a good sign. That meant nothing big was lurking around. I reached my campsite in the late afternoon, a small clearing near a slow-moving creek. It was perfect. I set up my tent, collected some firewood, and settled in for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest began to change. The air turned cooler, and the sounds of the day faded into the distant croaks of frogs and the occasional hoot of an owl. Then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, I heard it. A single, distant scream. It echoed through the trees, faint but unmistakable. I froze, my entire body tensing. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. I listened, waiting. Nothing. Just the crackling of my fire and the steady chirp of crickets. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe even another camper, though I hadn't seen a single soul all day. Then, just as I was convincing myself to let it go, another scream. This time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, scanning the darkness beyond my campsite. The beam cut through the trees, revealing nothing but tangled branches and shifting shadows. But something felt off. The forest was too quiet now. The frogs had stopped. The insects, too. Everything was still. Then I heard footsteps. Soft. Slow. Coming from behind my tent. I whipped the flashlight in that direction, my pulse hammering. "Hello," I called. No answer. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. Then, from the trees, a figure stepped out. A woman. She was barefoot, her clothes tattered and dirty. Her hair was matted, hanging over her face in thick, tangled strands. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, as if she were freezing. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They were wide, too wide, the whites visible all the way around. And she was staring right at me. I swallowed hard. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Just stood there, shivering. I took a cautious step forward. "Are you lost?" Nothing. Then, her mouth dropped open. Not like she was about to speak. Like something was wrong. Her jaw unhinged, hanging open far wider than any human jaw should. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, like she was gasping for breath, but no sound came out. Then, in a single, jerky movement, she lunged forward. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. "Hey! Stop!" But she didn't. She moved strangely, her limbs twitching unnaturally as she staggered toward me, her bare feet silent against the forest floor. I backed up fast, grabbing for the knife at my belt. "Stay back." And then, she stopped. Her head jerked to the side, as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and sprinted back into the trees. I stood there, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? I should have left. Right then and there. But some stupid part of me thought maybe, just maybe, she needed help. So I grabbed my flashlight and followed. The woods were silent as I moved forward, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. My heart was pounding, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. Then I saw it. A cabin. Small, old, half hidden by the trees. The door was slightly open, swaying gently in the breeze. I hesitated. Then, from inside, a soft, wet cough. My stomach twisted. I stepped closer, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. Hello. Silence. I pushed the door open wider. Inside, the cabin was wrong. The walls were covered in handprints. Smudged, dark, like they had been pressed there over and over again. The air was thick with the smell of something rotting. Then, in the corner of the room, the woman. She was crouched on all fours, her back to me. Her shoulders jerked with each ragged breath. "Hey," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She stopped breathing. Slowly, mechanically, her head twisted toward me. Not her body. Just her head. Her eyes locked onto mine. And she grinned. Wide. Too wide. Then she scuttled toward me, impossibly fast. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. I just remember bursting out of that cabin and sprinting through the woods. The trees blurred past me, branches clawing at my arms, the cold air burning my lungs. Behind me. Footsteps. Fast. Too fast. I ran harder, my legs screaming, my vision swimming. Then. My truck. I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door shut, my fingers fumbling for the keys. I started the engine. And just before I peeled out of there, I looked up. She was standing at the tree lean. Smiling. I didn't stop driving until I was hours away. I never reported it. Never told anyone what I saw. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when I close my eyes, I hear it. That wet, gasping breath. Right outside my window. I've been a park ranger for most of my life. I've seen a lot out in the wild, things that would make most people swear off camping forever. But nothing compares to what happened that night in Ocala National Forest. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. My girlfriend, Emma, and I, along with my best friend Tyler and his girlfriend Kelly, had planned this for months. We wanted to disconnect from the world, take in some fresh air, and enjoy the untouched beauty of nature. Emma had been dying to visit Alexander Springs, known for its crystal-clear waters and scenic trails. She had always been the adventurous one, the type who could spend hours in the woods, just admiring the smallest details. We arrived at our campsite late Friday afternoon. The place was beautiful, tall pines towering over us, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, and that distinct, fresh scent of the forest that city life could never replicate. We set up our tents, built a fire, and settled in for the night. But even on the first evening, something felt off. It was too quiet. If you've ever been deep in the woods, you know there's always sound. The chirping of birds, the buzzing of insects, the occasional rustling of something small moving through the underbrush. But here, nothing. Just an unnatural stillness, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Kelly noticed it too. She kept glancing around, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. I asked if she was okay. She hesitated. It's so dark out here. Tyler laughed. It's the woods, Kel. It's supposed to be dark. She forced a smile, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The next morning, Emma convinced us to go on a hike. She was practically buzzing with excitement, her camera in hand. Kelly, reluctant as ever, trailed behind. We hadn't gone far when Emma suddenly froze. She pointed at the ground. A footprint. But not just any footprint. Barefoot. Large. And wrong. The toes were elongated, almost claw-like, with deep impressions in the dirt. Tyler squatted down to get a closer look. Probably a bear, he said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Emma shook her head. Bears don't leave prints like this. Kelly took a step back. Let's just go back. This feels wrong. We should have listened to her. Instead, we kept going. The farther we walked, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was oppressive. And then came the sound, soft, deliberate footsteps in the distance, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. I told myself it was just paranoia. Just the wind. Just the forest playing tricks on us. By the time we got back to camp, the mood had completely shifted. No one spoke much. We stayed close to the fire that night, the light feeling like our only protection against the vast darkness surrounding us. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard it. James. I sat up instantly. It was Emma's voice, calling my name from the woods. But something about it wasn't right. James, come here. My stomach twisted. I glanced at Emma, she was asleep next to me. The voice called again. Louder. Closer. My heart pounded in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to stay put. But curiosity won out. I stepped outside the RV, gripping my flashlight tightly. Emma. I called, though I already knew it wasn't her. Silence. Then, from the tree line, something moved. A figure. Humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture bent, as if it had been broken and put back together the wrong way. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then it smiled. Not a normal smile. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched across its face in a way that no human should. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. And in the blink of an eye, the thing darted back into the woods with unnatural speed. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV. The firewood we had gathered was scattered, burned to embers. Tyler laughed nervously. Okay, so, someone's messing with us. Emma wasn't convinced. You think a person did that? It's probably some prank, Tyler insisted. Locals messing with tourists. Kelly, pale and shaken, whispered, that wasn't a person. Emma's face was grim. There's an old Navajo legend, she said. About skinwalkers. They can mimic voices, even faces. They hunt at night, luring people into the woods. Tyler scoffed. That's a desert legend. Emma shook her head. Legends travel. And whatever this thing is, it's here. The argument spiraled until I stepped in. Enough. We're leaving. Now. As we scrambled to break camp, the forest felt different, like it was closing in on us. The silence was heavier, the trees casting longer shadows. Then we heard it. Tyler's voice. Guys. I found something. Come check it out. We froze. Tyler was right next to me. His face drained of color. Stay here, I said, gripping my flashlight. But Tyler followed me, despite my protest. The deeper we went, the darker it got. Then we saw it. A figure. Standing between the trees, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. Hey! I shouted. The figure turned. Its face was a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Then it let out an inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. We're leaving. Now. I yelled. We piled into the RV, and I started the engine. The tires spun in the dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us. Its limbs jerking unnaturally, its mouth forming words that weren't quite right. James, it mimicked. Its voice was distorted, wrong. Don't leave. Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass. The creature recoiled and fell back into the trees. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station. The ranger took one look at us and sighed. Alexander Springs, he asked. We nodded. He shook his head. You're lucky you made it out. We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart. Kelly refused to ever go camping again. Emma became obsessed with researching the legend, trying to make sense of what we saw. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild, not because of the animals or the terrain, but because something else lives there. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. I had always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, things lurking in the woods, I thought they were just that. Stories. Fun to tell around a campfire, maybe even enough to spook yourself for a night or two, but nothing more than imagination running wild. I don't believe that anymore. It started when I took a job as a surveyor for a small private firm. The work was simple: mapping land, checking boundary lines, making sure everything matched up before new developments broke ground. Most of the time, it was boring. Long hours walking through dense forests, marking trees, measuring distances. But the pay was good, and I didn't mind the solitude. When my boss asked me to do a solo survey deep in Ocala National Forest, I didn't hesitate. It was a vast stretch of protected land, thick with pine and cypress trees, swamplands, and winding trails that had been used for centuries. The place was beautiful, but unforgiving. The first day was uneventful. I spent hours trekking through the brush, marking coordinates on my GPS, making notes on the terrain. The air was humid, thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Every so often, I'd hear the distant call of birds, the occasional rustling in the undergrowth. But as the sun started to dip below the treetops, I noticed something strange. The woods had gone silent. No birds. No insects. Just stillness. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, made your skin prickle, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shook off the unease and decided to set up camp. I found a small clearing by a creek, pitched my tent, and built a small fire. As night settled in, I forced myself to relax. It was just another job. At least, that's what I told myself. I woke up sometime after midnight. Something had pulled me from sleep, a sound. At first, I couldn't place it. The fire had died down, leaving only glowing embers. The air was thick with mist, swirling lazily between the trees. Then I heard it again. A whistle. Low, distant. 3 rising notes. I sat up, my pulse quickening. It came again, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it over the trees. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating the skeletal branches. Nothing. Then, from the darkness, something whistled back. My throat went dry. It wasn't an echo. It was a response. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. Probably just a bird, I told myself. Some kind of night creature. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Moving closer. I clicked off my flashlight. I don't know why, maybe some primal instinct told me that if I couldn't see it, it couldn't see me. My ears strained in the darkness. Then I heard it. Hello. A voice. Soft. Too soft. It was coming from the woods ahead of me. Then, from behind me. Hello. Identical. The same tone, the same pitch. Like a recording. The air turned ice cold. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then, laughter. Not normal laughter. It was wrong. Like someone trying to imitate human laughter but failing. Stretched out, broken, too high-pitched. I turned on my flashlight again, panic taking over. The beam flickered, casting long shadows, and then I saw it. A figure. Tall. Thin. Too thin. Its limbs were elongated, its skin gray and mottled, stretched too tightly over sharp bones. It was hunched forward, watching me. Then it smiled. Jesus Christ. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing a row of jagged, needle-like teeth. I ran. I didn't think. Didn't grab my pack. I just ran. The forest blurred past me, the branches whipping at my arms, my legs burning as I sprinted through the undergrowth. And behind me. The whistling. 3 rising notes. Over and over and over. I tripped, hitting the ground hard, my hands sinking into damp earth. My chest heaved as I scrambled back to my feet. And then. The whistling came from right beside me. I swung my flashlight wildly, the beam shaking with my trembling hands, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. Then, slowly, deliberately, a voice whispered in my ear. Hello. I don't remember running after that. I just remember bursting through the trees, gasping for air as I stumbled onto an old dirt road. My truck was still there, right where I had left it. I practically threw myself inside, locking the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. I peeled out of there, speeding down the winding roads, not stopping until I was miles away from that place. I quit my job the next day. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I hear it. Low. Distant. 3 rising notes. Whistling. And I know that whatever I saw in those woods, it hasn't forgotten me. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing.